Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I think we can honestly say that Zimbabwe's experiment to become a democratic country has been a total disaster. After 44 years of independence, Zimbabwe has failed the, the grade one test, if you want, to hold free, fair, and credible elections. ZANU-PF has blatantly rigged elections for the last 44 years. That is the truth. It's tragic, but it is the truth. Why has Zimbabwe's experiment failed so dismally? I think one can look at the three key stakeholders in that experiment: the ruling party, the opposition, and the people themselves. Let's start by defining what is democracy. I think the best definition of democracy was given by Abraham Lincoln, the American president, the 16th American president, who said democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. Political power is invested in the people. That is at the heart of democracy. The people elect representatives in a free, fair, and credible electoral process, and those representatives make policies on behalf of the country. And every so often, they've got to go back to the people, who will have the option of removing them from office and putting somebody else. That is the essence of democracy. In our case, Zimbabwe, democracy did not work. I think when we look at the first group of players, the governing party, ZANU-PF, who have ruled this country for the last 44 years with an iron fist, if you want. The truth of the matter is, ZANU-PF never really wanted democracy, never wanted the people to have the power. If ZANU-PF had had its way, Zimbabwe would have been a de facto one-party state from 1980. Indeed, the two parties, the two main political parties, ZANU and ZAPU, each one of them wanted a one-party state. It's just that they could not agree on which one. ZANU wanted a ZANU one-party state. ZAPU wanted a ZAPU one-party state. All attempts to unite the two parties had resulted in failure again and again. The Patriotic Front was the last attempt to get the two parties to unite just before its independence. But such was the mistrust between the leadership of the two parties that that attempt also failed. So the 1980 elections, the two parties contested those elections as two separate entities. They went to the Lancaster House talks as two separate entities. And so one can say that the British government and the Smith regime, who were the other parties to those talks, would have never contemplated a one-party state. The two parties themselves could not table a one-party state. The simple reason that each would have wanted to be the dominant party. So the best thing compromise they managed to get was to come up with the Lancaster House talks, which produced a constitution that said Zimbabwe was to be a multi-party democracy. So from the word goes, ZANU-PF did not want democracy. While the party signed the Lancaster House talks, one of the requirements was that they were to disband their liberation or activists from the field so that there could be campaigns, free campaigns for all parties contesting the elections. ZANU-PF kept a significant number of their operatives in the field. And their message to the nation was very simple and very clear. If ZANU-PF does not win these elections, the Bush War would continue. As I said, one of the tenets of democracy is that the people should have a meaningful say in who governs the country in a free, fair, and credible elections. If the electorate are told that if you do not vote for A, the Bush War would continue, that immediately undermines that tenet. ZANU-PF didn't mind that. And some people have argued that it was just only a campaign gimmick. No, it wasn't. One has got only to look at what happened in 1983, 3 years after independence, when ZANU-PF launched the Kukurawundi. The primary purpose of the Kukurawundi was to coerce their main political rival, ZAPU, to give up its political ambitions and join ZANU-PF, which they finally did in 1987 to sign the Unity Accord. And that cleared the way for ZANU to impose the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country to this day. So as far as ZANU-PF is concerned, they really didn't want democracy. They did not want the people to have the power. It's as simple as that. What about the opposition? Well, the opposition, the MDC, which has been the main opposition this last 23 years, when they got into power, when they were elected into power, when they launched their party in 1999, they launched it on the basis that they were going to force ZANU-PF to implement democratic reforms to ensure that the elections were free, fair, and credible. What was their commitment to that? Well, it wasn't much really. Because when they got into power, following the 2008 elections, which were rejected by SADC and the AU, forcing ZANU-PF to sign the Global Political Agreement, which launched the Government of National Unity. And when Morgan Tsvangirai and company were sworn into that government of national unity, Mugabe issued them with the ministerial limousines. Gave them the very generous salaries and allowances. And for Morgan Tsvangirai himself, he got the US $4 million mansion in Highlands. The rest was history. MDC leaders completely forgot about the reforms. It's interesting how many leaders in the MDC have continued to deny what happened. It's almost like it didn't happen. That is a historic fact. MDC leaders, when they got into power, they forgot about the reforms. Their commitment to democracy was not there. They were only paying lip service to democratic change. 5 years of the GNU, 2008 to 2013, were without doubt the best the country has ever had in terms of trying to implement democratic reforms to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. Not even one reform proposal was submitted in those 5 years. SADC, who were the guarantor of the global political agreement, notably Minister Lindiwe Zulu from South Africa, did her best to nag MDC leaders to implement reforms, but to no avail. Not even one token reform was implemented. Almost in a panic, 2013, end of the GNU was approaching. Fresh elections were to be held, and not even any meaningful reform had been implemented. SADC leaders called a special SADC summit in Maputo in June 2013, in which Morgan Tsvangirai and his fellow MDC leaders were told in no uncertain terms, you should not go to these coming elections until reforms were implemented. They ignored the advice. When Mugabe went back to Zimbabwe, his minister of the ZANU-PF Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs in the GNU, Patrick Chinamasa, called a press conference at which he announced that ZANU-PF was not going to postpone the 2013 elections as proposed by SADC because they don't see why they should postpone them. SADC was saying you must implement electoral reforms at least before the elections are held. And Chinamasa said, what electoral reforms are you talking about? I was Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs. There is not one outstanding reform proposal that was tabled in Parliament that is waiting to be decided on. In truth, there has not been even one single reform proposal in 5 years of the GNU. I think it was that made the SADC leaders throw their towel in as well. If not even one token reform had been submitted in 5 years of the GNU, what's the point? So the 2000 elections went ahead, and ZANU-PF militantly rigged those elections. It is interesting that some of the MDC leaders have openly admitted the problem of failing to implement reforms. I've often quoted David Coulthard, what he said in his book, admitting that the 2013 elections were flawed. And the only rational thing that they should have done then was not to participate. But they did participate out of greed. We cannot keep repeating the same mistake and pretending that it has no effect. Of course, it has effect. The truth of the matter is, MDC leaders have since discovered that as long as they participate in the flawed elections, they will have a share of the spoils of power. This is the quotation in David Coulthard's book. He was admitting that the 2013 elections were so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. If any of his friends were committed to free, fair, and credible elections, then they would have withdrawn, but they did not. They were after the few gravy train seats that ZANU-PF was giving away. Indeed, it was the same bribes that stopped the opposition implementing any reforms during the GNU. So this was just history repeating itself. And last year we had the opportunity to again engage ZANU-PF and force them to implement reforms. But once again, the opposition decided to participate in those flawed elections because they were after the few gravy train seats. Chamisa's promise that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes is such an outrage. It doesn't make any sense at all. But he made it because here was Chamisa and his colleagues. They were hell bent on participating in those elections. They were not going to do anything else. They were after the few gravy train seats that ZANU-PF was offering. And indeed, a few of the few Triple C leaders who won last year's elections went on to take their oath of office and take up their seats, their gravy train seats, even after SADC and the AU election observers had condemned that process as flawed and illegal. They didn't care about that. All they care about is they have their share of the spoils of power. So we have got the ruling party that is not committed to democratic values. And now we've got the opposition who, for the sake of being elected, promise the people that they will deliver the democratic changes the nation was dying for. But when they had the chance to do so, they not only failed to implement even a token reform, But they've even gone one step further and they've been participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. And then there is the third stakeholders, the people themselves. While in 1980, one could understand that the people could not argue with ZANU-PF, you do not argue about your right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country when you are looking up the business end of an AK-47 rifle. That I accept. But if the people themselves had understood what democracy was, that they had the power to decide who governs the country, then they would have understood that their fight to get back that power was paramount. While it is true that in the late 1990s, people accepted the reality that ZANU-PF was corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical, and that as long as the regime stayed in power, nothing would change. And hence, they rallied together and started calling for democratic change. Yes, it is the ordinary people who have risked all livelihoods, limbs, and many have even died in electing the opposition to positions of power. But it is clear that the ordinary people did not understand that it was their responsibility to make sure that the opposition delivered on those promises. Indeed, one of the things that have undermined that fight is the sheer naivety of the electorate. Even now, with the benefit of hindsight, many people out there, ordinary Zimbabweans, have no clue that the primary purpose of the 2008 to 2018 GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. They still have no clue. And so it was easy for the opposition to sell out on that and pretend everything is okay. Indeed, the level of naivety of the ordinary Zimbabwean, particularly the opposition supporters, is so unbelievable that you say to yourself, there is no way you can have a healthy and functioning democracy when you've got an electorate that is this naive. We've gone from, we want democratic changes to make sure that we've got free, fair, and credible elections. When the opposition failed to deliver that, they changed tune. Since 2018, the opposition have been rallying their supporters to participate in these flawed elections on the basis that the opposition have devised ways of winning rigged elections. If you're going to have rigged elections, there's nothing democratic about it. Rigged elections are saying, you, the people, you have given up your power to elect who is going to govern the country in a free, fair, and credible process. You want to elect, you think you can win those elections even when they are rigged. think that is the most naive and self-contradicting approach one can get. Only somebody who doesn't even know what they're talking about would go along with that. And the tragedy is they've gone along with it in 2013, 2018, and then last year. At the present moment, Zimbabwe is gearing for the next round of elections, 2028. The people who should be at the front of the fight to restore their democratic right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country have no clue what is happening here. None. Even now, with the benefit of hindsight, they still have no clue. What the people should be fighting for now, after all the wasted opportunities of the last 23 years of an opposition that was supposed to implement reforms and failed to do so, is accept that reality and accept the need to elect opposition that will implement those reforms. The blind following of the same individuals who have failed to implement even one meaningful reform only goes to show that the people themselves still have do not understand what has gone on the last 23 years. Even if SADC last year had made the bold decision of denying ZANU-PF political legitimacy and had somehow managed to get the reforms implemented, all the democratic reforms that the country needed, and thus delivered to the nation of Zimbabwe a healthy and functioning democracy. I think with this level of ignorant electorate, if that democracy was handed to the people in a silver platter in January, within a few months, we would have seen the emergence of corrupt and tyrannical regimes. And by now, they would have seriously usurped the people's power. We will still be talking of going into the 2028 elections with every chance that those elections will be rigged, because the people themselves would have failed to defend that democratic space because they don't understand it. Well, Abraham Lincoln gave what one can only call as the flesh to democracy. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. It was the Greek 2,500 years ago who gave mankind democracy. And at the time, those 2,500 years ago, the Greeks understood the importance of educating the electorate. They realized that democracy would never work unless the people are educated, knowledgeable, and diligent. I think the Zimbabwe electorate is far from that. And at the present moment, both ZANU-PF and the opposition are taking full advantage of the fact that the electorate are ignorant, naive, and gullible. What we saw Chamisa doing last year is proof of that. Only a naive, ignorant, and gullible electorate would believe that Chamisa has plugged all the vote rigging loopholes when there was not even a verified voters roll. We did not have to reinvent democracy. We only had to adapt it and apply it for our own selves. Alas, 44 years after independence, we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections because none of the key players, the ruling party, the main opposition, and the electorate, have bothered to understand what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. But the truth of the matter is, until we learn, until we address this fundamental problem, Zimbabwe is not getting out of this mess. Zimbabwe is a failed state. And the consequences of the failed state is that the government is unstable and there is criminal waste of both the country's material and human resources. Millions of our people are living in absolute abject poverty. And yet the country has got so much wealth and is being wasted. That will continue until we sort ourselves out. No one is going to do it for us. Indeed, like I said, even if SADC had sorted that problem for us last year, after the rigged elections of 2023, I think I could honestly say that by now, ZANU-PF and Triple C would have emerged and preparing for the 2028 elections, not making sure that each one of them competing on how they're going to rig those elections. Because the electorate themselves have lost power already. Holding it, democracy, requires that the electorate should be educated, should be knowledgeable, and should be diligent. It is even more imperative when, as we are, we have got a well established now de facto one party state. Dismantling it will need an electorate that is really alert, that understands what democracy is, and are not going to be easily conned by both ZANU-PF or the opposition into giving those parties, those buffoons, the political power because they've just been shortchanged. we have got a tough challenge ahead. If Zimbabwe does not stop ZANU-PF rigging 2028 elections, then the country will continue drifting deeper and deeper into the abyss. This is a fact. We have been drifting in that direction for the last 44 years, and that will continue. It is within our powers. It is not rocket science to understand what constitutes free, fair, and credible elections. We just have got to make the effort to learn it. And so far, alas, we've not made even an effort to do so. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, and I hope we'll meet again and discuss this issue. Good night, and thank you.